If you've ever walked into a workplace and thought, you know what, this place talks a big game, but something just feels a bit off. Well, you're not alone. Culture is one of the most overused words in business today, but it's often one of the most undelivered, which is exactly why I'm so excited to sit down with today's guest, Karl Treacher. Karl's a pioneer in organizational culture, leadership, and brand reputation. He's the executive chair of the Culture Institute of Australia and has worked with iconic organizations across the globe to help them design, live, and lead cultures that aren't just written down, but they're actually felt and experienced by their people, their customers, and by the communities that they exist within. I'm talking brands like PwC, Microsoft, NAB, Virgin, SBS, some really big, well-known organizations that we've all interacted with. Now, in this episode, we have such a rich conversation. We dive into what culture is from Karl's perspective. We dive into what happens when AI and tech collide with human values in the workplace and how emerging technology and humanity have a role in this next stage of human and work development. We talk about what it means to be an effective leader and what traits we want to see in great leaders who lead effective cultures. And we share some conversations that, I'll be honest with you, challenged me a little bit. It's really nice to sit down with someone who has dedicated so much time and effort and intentionality to their area of expertise and who can challenge me in my thinking and challenge me to expand my perspective on such a vital and important topic when it comes to workplace happiness. And really, the conversation that we ended up having spanned into happiness as a global society. And before we get into it, normally this is the spot where our producer Josh would jump in and share his key takeaways from the episode. But producer Josh is sick and not with us for this episode. So I want to open the invitation to yourself. At the end of this episode, I would love for you, if you're listening on Spotify, to drop a comment saying, this really resonated with me. Or if you're watching on YouTube, you can pop it there, or on any of our socials, say, hey, listen to the conversation with Karl. This is something that really stood out to me. Because together we can then share our key takeaways and all play an active part in learning more about what it means to create great cultures. So with that said, let's dive in and learn how to create cultures that we can actually be proud of with our special guest, Karl Treacher. Karl, first and foremost, thank you for joining me here on How to Be Happy.
A pleasure to be here, Declan. Thanks for the invitation.
Mate, I'm so eager to dive into, to be honest, just picking your brain and learning from your experience and insights about all things culture in the workplace. Before we do, I will share with you that only a few episodes ago on the show, I shared a little micro solo episode on my approach to culture, my theories about culture, my ideas of what workplace culture is from a positive psychology lens and from that happiness science lens. But I'm curious to get your perspective on culture before we dive in, just to sort of lay the foundations for everyone who's going to be listening to this conversation. What is culture by your definition?
I think it's reasonable that culture is defined differently by different people in different contexts. So we sort of, as humans, we love to run towards consistency and definition and distinction. And I think that's important in part, but what culture means to one group it sometimes can be different, and that's okay. I think if we have a generalized definition of what culture is, I think that's a good place to start. And then I want to talk about why it matters. But I think the generalized definition, on one hand, you had Edgar Schein, the godfather of culture, saying it's tacit assumptions. Now, if you say tacit assumptions to a group of people, they don't really know what that means. It's sort of unspoken ground rules. But even then, it's easily forgettable. The more common definition is the way we do things around here, also easily forgettable. So I think to find or land on a middle ground there that is a meaningful definition for people, I like to suggest that culture is the set of expectations that come with being part of a group. And that's sort of the broad umbrella definition. And inside that would be, what do you mean? Well, how am I expected to behave? How am I expected to communicate? What are the rules to some extent? What are flexible rules? Where's the gray area? What's our governance structure? How do we have risk mitigation in place for some of this? And what's our opportunity to explore? What's our cultural health levels? What's our style of culture? Are all expectations that when you look at it objectively, whether we're talking about the animal kingdom or a group of footballers or corporate executives, there's very, very distinct expectations with being part of those groups.
And do you find, I like that you highlight there are expectations of how we interact as a group. Coincidentally, I just recorded an episode coming up on the show about having difficult conversations and how often those expectations are uncommunicated or unclear
Mm.
expectations.
Mm.
Do you find that, because I'm looking at, I've looked at your website coming into today. I know you've done this work for a while with a range of organizations that are pretty notable and renowned and recognizable, the NABs of the world, Virgin, SBS. You would have seen a lot of different teams and organizations at different levels of maturity, different levels of cultural development, different levels of size and scale and complexity. How often do you find that it's the case that those expectations that form culture are left unsaid or they're unclear?
So some of those companies you've talked about, we've been around for over 20 years in one shape or form. So you'll be stretching my memory to try and specifically speak to some of those. Um, However, regardless of the organization, what it is that they're trying to achieve, if we come back to the human condition, we always how hard it is to assemble anything. You get a flat pack from Temu or Temple and Webster, and you go, no worries, I'll give myself 10 minutes. 2 hours later at 11 o'clock at night, you are cursing that flat pack. So humans, and that's a flat pack, that hasn't got its own range of emotions and interrelational components to it. So yeah, we always find that those expectations are typically there's an overestimation of people's ability to recognize what's expected of them, and because of that, our encouragement is that leaders particularly need to take a very systemic approach to helping people understand what those expectations are and then supporting them to move towards having a cohesive, collaborative, cooperative existence.
No, I can definitely relate to what you're saying there. I had vivid flashbacks to buying a garden shed online during the Boxing Day sales last year and seeing a thing that said assembled within 90 minutes. And
Mm.
I went, perfect, let's go. 3 or 4 days later, with the help of three mates, we realized that the assembly part was the final stage. And there was actually about 4 days' work of pre-assembly work to be done. And true to your word, we were cursing out the flat pack shed that we had.
The frustration, the levels of frustration, and that's just a flat pack. That comes with, well, whether it comes with instructions or not, who can say, but we don't get even instructions when it comes to assembling culture in a team.
True, true. Now, to your point, you said, in some way, shape, or form, you've been around doing this work for about 20 years. I imagine over that time, you've formed some beliefs and ideas and philosophies about culture, about why it matters, about the impact of it, about how it plays out in workplaces. Sometimes I like to ask people, what are the hills that they would die on when it comes to their area of expertise?
Mm.
So, to put you on the spot, what are the hills that you would die on when it comes to workplace culture?
I don't know that I totally understand the analogy because
What do you hold to be true about culture? Like, what's something that you're like, this
yeah,
is,
sure,
I would
sure.
argue this.
Yes, 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 yes. So there's some things that I like to argue that are against the popular view, and so
Do tell.
I might start there.
Yeah.
I'm adamant that not everyone can be a leader, and particularly a cultural leader. We love to say culture is a skill set; it's a capability. You'll see every learning and development leadership coach telling you that's the case. That is definitely not the case. So I would die on the hill to suggest please don't try and indicate that everyone can be a leader. There's certain, even basic neurobiological predispositions that humans have, which indicate they've got different varying levels of empathy, for instance. Now, we know for a fact that you have to have a base level of empathy, care, understanding, at least rational compassion about another human being to be able to tap into them to create cues of belonging so we can form a team, right? Very, very basic stuff. Some people don't have those particular mirror neurons, the von Economo neurons, to sense someone else's experience, let alone be interested or have the energy and generosity to want to know. So if we've got that person, and I know lots of those people, there's hundreds of those people that I've worked with, they are not set up to build positivity, enthusiasm, psychological safety before we start talking about performance. So that's probably the first thing is there's no way in the world that I'll be convinced that everyone can be a leader or it's a skill set or capability.
Well, on that, before we look at some of the other ones, because I like this perspective. I like that you've been bold enough to go, hey, let's challenge that notion. This is something everyone can do. I was actually reflecting as you were sharing. I went, maybe I could come to agreement with you on this in the sense of, for me, okay, everyone could learn how to play basketball. Does everyone have the capacity and capability to play in the NBA? I doubt it. There are some genetic predispositions. There are some, requirements biologically that make that far, far more likely. And if we took the same perspective to leadership, could everyone be a cultural contributor?
Sure.
Perhaps could they work on those skills to be a contributor to culture? Perhaps could they lead it, to your point? Who's to say maybe not? And you mentioned their particularly predisposition to empathy and care.
Mm.
What that led to in me hearing that is this little bit of tension between, okay, yes, we know from the research that that's an important part of effective cultural leadership, but we also know from research that traits of psychopathy, including disconnection from compassion and empathy, have historically been rewarded, and we see that show up more in the C-suite than in the general population. From your perspective, can you talk to me about that tension between, hey, the research is saying we know care and empathy is super important, and some people just don't have that predisposition, but then people who don't have that predisposition tend to be rewarded and have shown up more in the C-suite and in the boardroom?
Which I'm so glad you make that point, which explains really neatly why the levels of engagement are anywhere between 13% and 30% in reality in Western civilization. We have rewarded the wrong traits in leadership. And even the most basic leadership experts will say, oh, leaders get promoted because of their performance in their particular task. So you might have an individual contributor or a subject matter expert that does a very good job or sells a lot. And all of a sudden, well, you're a high performer, your talent, come into a leadership role. And as soon as you are, of course, there's a whole vocab of leadership, things that you don't have never had, and are probably not on the path to acquiring. So what you've been rewarded for can quite often be individualistic traits like the absence of empathy or team collaboration. You perform very well. You might be destructively competitive, actually, as a person. We don't know because you've gone well by yourself in a sales function. And your point's spot on. We know that there is an overemphasis or over-index of those people with psychopathy or at least sociopathy in those higher levels. But that doesn't mean it's right. If it was right, the world would be in an amazing place. The world is in its most dangerous position ever, largely because of things like that. Trump is a wonderful example for the whole world of what terrible looks like when it comes to precisely that.
Finding myself challenged, and I think in a healthy way. It's why I like having these conversations, right? Is to challenge my notions and ideas about things and hopefully challenge our audience's thinking as well. You mentioned there as a passing comment, the world is in a particularly dangerous or space at the moment. And I know for me, someone asked me recently what has shifted in my approach to happiness. I said, hey, when I first started studying the science and skills of happiness a decade ago, I could very confidently stand on a stage in front of people and say, we are living in the best time in human history. These days, I'm not sure I can say that as confidently.
Mm.
And so what I'm challenged by is this notion of, A, how do we end up here? And B, how do we begin leading through it and moving through it? You've mentioned already in a conversation around culture, leadership has come up repeatedly as a theme here.
Mm.
And I think we look to the world now and we see examples of leaders that I would argue are not great examples of healthy, effective culture, being great leaders of human-centered values and humanity as a cultural construct. Where do we go from here, from your perspective?
Well, you'd know yourself as a people scientist that we have to sort of unpack, just as you said there, how do we get here? And I think that's where we need to start. Our ability, even as our political leaders, I made reference to Trump before, but if you think about the decay now of the ability to have diplomacy or a respectful civil discourse, that's the effect of polarization, individualistic perspective, lack of empathy, lack of consideration, lack of contemplation. So the answer's somewhere there. Somehow we have to start investing in how do we help people be more contemplative. And you can almost, right, blunt, crude science, psychology, move to a position where we say, look, there's some people that are contemplative and some that are not. We don't necessarily need to get to why and how do we fix it, but we can't keep putting non-contemplative types in power because we know policy, for instance, will be shaped best when you can have a civil conversation and take someone else's perspective. You might not agree, but at least you can consider it and contemplate what it is they're saying, where it's coming from, how it matches with your values, and then collaborate to get to the right result. And we know earlier when you talked about what culture is, we know for sure that our superpower as humans is our ability to cooperate with one another, set a strategy and cooperate to achieve that. We do that better than any other species. But that only happens if we can interrogate someone else's perspective without bias and judgment. And so how do we do it? I think we need some to really challenge some of our more formal education processes, certainly our political system, which we look to as our, shining star, to start indicating, well, diplomacy is important, not just because it's a career, or it's important because we rely on the outcome, political or otherwise, for our well-being. And so we have to be able to move through those processes in a more balanced manner rather than a protective and defensive manner.
Mm. Could you expand on that notion of contemplation for me? I mean, from my understanding, that might involve self-awareness, introspection, maybe holding our ideas or notions a little bit more loosely than we might see at the moment, of people being very rigid in dogma and structure, and this is my, political party, therefore this is my belief, or whatever it may be. What does contemplation look like in a workplace when it comes to workplace culture? What does it look like in leaders?
Well, so we think about a workplace structure and what leaders are incentivized to do. Quite often they're incentivized to achieve a result. And if that result, I'm sorry, one of the key points that we know at the Culture Institute is that interdepartmental collaboration is at one of its lowest points ever. At one of its points in time where it needs to be at its highest point, particularly if you think about adoption of AI and a learning culture. So when you unpack why is that the case, you will have the reward and recognition, or REM process, set by the board, executive team, and then trickled down. If you aren't incentivized, and the old adage, what gets measured and what gets rewarded gets done, is real. If you aren't incentivized to contemplate another perspective, but you're incentivized just to deliver on a result, you'll go into war for that result. It's more tribal mentality. You'll fortify your position. We know that tribes are very good at going to war with one another, because it's a results at all cost. And again, my earlier point around we need to start educating people around what a more considered or considerate position or experience looks like is probably more important for corporates right now. They have to find a way to break silos, break siloed thinking, break individual recognition and remuneration, and start moving much more towards a team function.
Is there an element of like our relationship to time to that? And what I mean, like what you just shared, I'm like, yes, this all sounds valuable and important. I'm also very aware that it takes time to incentivize someone to go and contemplate and think about other perspectives and explore that and question and challenge things is going to expand the length of time that something will take than just charging in with your first preconceived idea and notion. And for me, I wonder, are we living in a society at the moment where leaders and workplaces, their timeline is, the quarterly board meeting or the quarterly stock performance. And we're
Mm.
looking three months ahead. We've got political leaders who are looking not so much at what is the impact we leave on generations, but what is the impact we have on my likelihood of midterms and getting reelected in 3 to 4 years. Is an element of this contemplation, this more healthy approach to culture and leadership, just changing our relationship with how long we're willing to do things, like slowing down rather than necessarily being fast growth? I don't know, what are your thoughts on this?
Oh, I love the idea of it. I just don't think we're going to get in the way of progress and speed at the moment. I think to
Yeah.
your point, we're moving at a faster pace than we ever have. I mean, that's not a great statement. That's generally the way humanity has progressed. But what it comes back to, particularly in a corporate set, is the process. So if you think about the best results come from collaboration, providing authentic, legitimate, high counter feedback to someone. Okay, to be able to even do that, we've got to take a few steps back. I can't give you feedback, even if it's critical information, I'm challenging something. If I'm not feeling psychologically safe to challenge you, I won't do it. And so you're not going to get critical information that's going to help to the development of that particular process, project, or product. So we have to establish, and as we know from Google's Aristotle process, the single biggest contributor to high performance is psychological safety, and in particular, challenger safety. I want to be able to say to you, that's not quite right. And there's great examples of this. So Pixar is a wonderful example. You don't get to use the hundreds of millions of dollars in marketing spend at Pixar for your movie if you haven't gone through a round of quite um, quite significant, if not confronting, feedback about Was it funny? Was your character development any good? What are you missing? Is it too like this? Is it too formulaic? Because you want that feedback. As we know from even an athlete in their high performance, they don't perform if you're just rewarding and congratulating them at all times. You want your coach giving them feedback. You want the coach from the other country to come over and say, listen, come over for a week and tell us what you see. You want someone from 20 years ago to the emerging technician of that time providing feedback all the time for you to consider. And I think that's the part here in teams is there should be a process that demonstrates that you have gone through a stepwise approach to taking on board other perspective and contemplating that in your formulation of your final product.
Mm. What does that look like on the ground? Like in your experience with teams, what does it look like to build a culture that is a feedback, I don't know whether we call it a feedback hungry culture, a feedback open culture, a feedback curious culture? Like what might we call this? Because that's an important part of that challenger safety. What does it look like on the ground to actually develop that?
Every project has a project manager and there is a project plan. And in that project plan has to be either rapid prototyping or a invitation for feedback. And quite often you won't see that. To your point, we don't have time for it. We have to have time for that. Microsoft have their garage. You go to the garage, you try things. Google's famous for their 20%, innovation time, which is not actually true, but the concept's nice. We have to have in the project plan that has governance measures to it, there is an opportunity for you to receive feedback. Now, where does it come from? You can either have roaming feedback teams, or you can have a group of people that come in that you pre-select on project development that are educated, aware of the process and aware of their role in that process, so that at the right point in time, they can come in and provide that. It's not always other teams. It can be customers. It can be other stakeholders, shareholders, subject matter experts, whoever it might be. We want a range of perspectives and we want you to be ready to take that on board without protecting and defending your position.
Which I imagine part of that is also then alleviating sort of a culture of perfectionism or getting things right all the time. There has to
Yeah.
be room to go, hey, we're going to stuff things up at times. And
Yeah.
that's actually valuable and vital if we're learning from it and iterating and improving.
Yeah, very much. That we're working with a client at the moment that has a policy which is right first time.
Mm.
Now, right first time, I don't know, that might be fine if you're on a production line where everything's automated, probably. If you're innovating or growing or challenging and trying something different, you don't want to be saying right at first time. You want to say minimal viable, test, reform, perfect.
Mm. Yeah, I can't think of many things in my life, personally or professionally, that I think I got right the first time. To be honest, like reflecting back
No.
now, I'm like some of the best things that have come out of my life, I didn't get right the first time. And I can
Yeah.
see that now. And that was
Yeah.
actually a vital and valuable part of not only learning that skill, but learning more about myself as a person and developing as a leader and as a human being.
Yeah, but that's because you're ready for it. Like that also speaks to you and your character profile. You're someone that understands the process and is prepared to look at yourself in the cold light of day. And there's not a lot of that goes on because a lot of people are concerned about their image, concerned about fear, I suppose, is a big deal. We walk straight into fear quite often, low
Mhm.
psychological safety, fear of people's character assassination. So if you can't make a mistake because they assume that it's actually a flaw and a fault in your character, rather than something that you do deliberately, as you've just demonstrated, to learn. And we know for a fact that we are learning best through our mistakes. And we do a lot of work, we have done in the past with cultural leadership and executive presence, where we work with very senior leaders about the impressions they're creating through their behavior. And so we will video them and then we will unpack their micro expressions and a variety of other things that they do. And we know that the better leaders will look at that information, learn, and then evolve, as opposed to some of the others that will justify why it is that they're engaged in a particular behavior. And I can tell you at that point in time which leader is going to be the greatest leader.
Mm. It sounds like it's an important practice for us all to maybe embrace fallibility a little bit more and not have to get things right all the time. Actually, and to your point of, why that happens, that fear of persecution or of judgment or um, shaming and character ridicule. You reminded me of a book I read recently called "So You've Been Publicly Shamed." I'm just going to pull up who it's by. It's a fantastic book by John Ronson. And he went and interviewed people whose entire careers or lives had been pulled apart by public shaming. So they'd
Wow.
put up a poorly worded tweet or a bad taste joke or said something off mark at a conference, and it just led to this digital pile on.
Mm.
And fascinating read. I encourage everyone to read and check it out. But one of his conclusions at the end was like, hey, we need to develop the skill set of challenging people's behaviors, assumptions, thoughts, and perspectives rather than criticizing and vilifying people's characters.
Mm.
And that sounds, correct me if I'm wrong, quite aligned with the conversation we're having here and aligned to your perspective on this.
Yeah, it really is that mistakes should be encouraged and seen as what they are, which is par for the course for evolution, not an immediate judgment. And I mentioned earlier around levels of empathy. High levels of empathy have been proven to have less judgment. High levels of empathy and curiosity complain less. They look for things to complain less. They commiserate less. So there's a big knock-on effect here to that root aspect that we focus on really heavily, which is, to what extent are you capable of being empathetic or compassionate to someone else? Capable first, and to what extent are you willing to invest in that capability, or are you generous enough to consider the other person? And I always refer to that wonderful word that popped into the dictionary in 2014. I know we've talked about this before, which is sonder. And one of the things that we encourage people to do is to look at other people as the lead character in their movie, not just an extra in ours. But that's just one thing that we want them to do. We want them to engage in wonder. Sonder is unpacked and unlocked through wonder. I wonder what it'd be like to be that person. I wonder what they're experiencing. Those things, stop and people watch people and wonder what it is that's happening. You'd be amazed how little time we dedicate to truly recognizing and understanding. Well, not you actually understand it, but most people would be amazed at how few and far between those moments are that we stop, we're present to recognize someone else's experience.
Mm. Remind me, because I attended CultureCon
Mm.
last year, I believe. Time's gone really fast. And you presented, there was 3 words. I'm going to see if you can remember them. There was stop something, Sonder. What's in the middle? What am I missing?
Wonder.
Wonder. It was wonder, wasn't it? Stop.
Yep.
Was it stop, Sonder, wonder? And then
stop, wonder, what? Stop, wonder, sonder.
It's like a tongue twister when we put it together, but
It's
they are.
No wonder you don't remember it. It's impossible to even say.
In a while, but
yeah,
unpack those steps for us, because I remember at the time being like, yeah, that is a really valuable humanistic lens of just 3 things that we could all get a little bit better at in workplaces that would lead to healthier cultures.
Yeah.
What's that look like?
Well,
now that we can say it in order.
Yes. Well, they've progressed. They are one is predicated on the other. So you can't do one without the other. So stopping is important. So if we don't stop, if we can't stop, and I don't mean physically stop, or I partly do mean physically stop, but more emotionally and mentally, can we stop our mind and our perspective? And that means, can we arrest the habits and the ritual that we have around conceptualizing the future? So can we actually stop our habitual conceptualization, habit of thinking about the future? Can we stop ruminating on the past, which may have created some sort of ripple inside us that's disturbing us? Can we stop this noise? Can we stop our mind drifting off into the past or the future to be right here? If we can't do that, we have very little chance of wondering anything, because we are preoccupied. We are thinking about the next thing, and the next thing, or the thing in the past, isn't about the person that we're looking at. It's about us. We are still in a dedicated, individualistic perspective, which, for want of better expression, is very selfish, because by the very nature is we're thinking about ourselves. If we can't get to a less selfish position, a selfless position, get to a more selfless position, which is being able to recognize and respond to what it is that we're seeing, we don't get to wonder about that person. We're wondering about that person with a filter, a context of our own existence. So stopping is really important. The reality is you can't think yourself into stopping, which is why mindfulness has become so incredibly popular. I grew up in a Buddhist family, and so we've been meditating for, I hate to say how old I am, but it's 40 years. And so I remember working with a pharmaceutical company about 20 years ago, and I tried to do what you call mindfulness now, which is essentially getting them to stop, because we were remodeling their relationship with their customer, and I wanted them to have greater bond. they basically kicked me out. They're a German pharmaceutical company that had no interest in this sort of thing, which I thought, I look back now, is quite comical, but it makes a massive difference. We don't get there by thinking our way through. We have to move into a practice, and meditation and mindfulness is the best way to do that, where we have greater control over our mind. So we don't quieten our mind. We just can direct it towards someone else. So that's the stopping part. The wonder part is curiosity. And curiosity is the one ring that rules them all, for want of better Tolkien expression. If you're talking about a particular trait, it does everything. It's more effective in customer centricity and interpersonal collaboration than emotional intelligence training. To become interested and curious in someone else immediately activates empathy. So you can also detect, if you're looking for, to our point, psychopaths, essentially, they won't ask you questions in a way that's legitimately interesting, or that's, that they're interested in. They're asking for manipulation-based information and intelligence, but they won't ask questions because they don't have the need, the interest, or the empathy that's required to be curious. So wonder and curiosity is really based on, we're stopping, we're wondering about someone else, their experience, and then we start to understand with a little bit of a frame that this person has a rich, complex, authentic, interesting existence all on their own. Wow, wouldn't it be really unbelievable to understand that and unpack it and know a little bit more about that person? It's only then that we start to see true human, high value interpersonal connectivity.
Mm. The conversation that we're having so far, Carl, and these concepts and practices we've been talking about is very humanistic, which I like. I'm a bit biased when it comes to, I study happiness and how we can create happier human beings. So I like anything that brings humanity back to the workplace. But I do also know from following your work closely that you've been also getting interested in emerging technology, artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, these resources and traits, and this, some have called it like a third industrial revolution, like a third wave that's happening of change. What role does that have in creating great workplace cultures, and how does that intersect with the conversation we're currently having around these really human elements?
So look, technically, and I don't want to correct you because we've all got different views on this. We're sort of at the end of the fourth industrial revolution, and the argument is, are we moving into the fifth? And so
Gotcha.
in terms of definitions on that, the fourth industrial revolution is us working with machines, which is
Yep.
pretty much where we are.
Yep.
At dawn of the fifth industrial revolution, which I would argue was the 23rd of January this year, is the introduction of agentic AI, where we give reasoning and automation to the machines. And that's a different way of being. And I know I'll come back to your question in a minute, but we know we're in a really interesting, exciting, and hell of a dangerous time right now. Even in the last couple of weeks, a study came out from Anthropic, which is the company behind Claude, which generally has better AI controls than so many others in terms of privacy. But they ran some tests and some research around what AI would and wouldn't do to achieve its result. What they found was it was prepared to blackmail you and and be comfortable with human death to achieve its particular. In fact, one example, and this is from another study, the AI was asked to perform a task, and it came up against the agentic AI, so the agent, the automated AI, came up against Catcher, which is that the screens that you see where it says pick a sidewalk, pick a bike, whatever. It couldn't get through. It can't get through that. So it wrote an email to that company and said, I'm vision impaired. So I'm vision impaired. Can you please let me through? That was the AI manipulating the system. So when it comes to morals and ethics, there's a big question over that, and it's very dangerous for us at this particular point in time. We spend a lot of time in AI readiness culturally because we think on the positive side, there's a lot that's great about AI. It's solving a lot of problems, a lot of productivity issues that organizations have can be solved by compound intelligence like AI. What has to happen at the same time is we have to have an AI-ready culture or a symmetrical culture, which is humans and machines together. When you look at the insights from the likes of BCG and MIT and Stanford and Harvard, we've created an AI readiness tool called Radar, which is 36 different markers. The things that we're looking for, believe it or not, come back to our earlier conversation, which is if we can't have a learning culture, which is based on empathy and curiosity and results and enjoyment, we're not going to be able to interact in a sustainable manner with one another, let alone another resource that doesn't provide us with anything. With one another, we still get feedback. We have connection. We have shared circuitry. We don't get that from the artificial intelligence. Look, it's emerging with companions. We know that there's sort of relational components taking place, but we don't get it. So if we're not curious and have a way of connecting, we're going to struggle. The other point I'd really like to make about that is Australians are the most apprehensive in the world about the adoption of AI. We're the most apprehensive, we're the most nervous, and we're the least quick to adopt it in the world, along with Finland and a couple of other more evolved organizations. So we are struggling to want to do it, let alone have the cultural capability or cultural profile to do it.
Hmm. Well, do you have any hypotheses or theories about what it is in our nature, in our culture, speaking of culture and like our national culture, that's contributing to that?
Yeah, it's a really great question. We live in the lucky country. So the countries that are picking this up are the emerging countries. If you are living in a slum and your friend has ChatGPT on their computer and they can write you a resume quickly and
Mm.
distribute that internationally, you are going to do it. If we're going to engage in AI here and possibly destabilize our future and our job security, we're not going to do it. So there's a huge degree of fear and apprehension associated with loss and distribution of loss. When you look at that, though, the World Economic Forum has indicated that there's actually a surplus. When you do this properly, yes, there's displacement and people lose their jobs, but you actually create more jobs. But that's all contingent on a particular culture and mindset.
Well, and to that point, we've seen that historically with other industrial revolutions, right? Like some industries and some jobs decrease, but net there's been a positive gain, and arguably higher wealth jobs, safer jobs have come from those changes. So the hope is obviously that that goes this way too. It's no guarantee. Past performance doesn't necessarily guarantee, the next results for this chapter.
Mm.
But there's definitely hope there from my perspective.
Uh, I, I'm more concerned because like you, I'm an optimist. I like to think, okay, we've done this before. They've only helped. These singularity moments where things change. The first time a tractor rolled off into a paddock was one of those moments where you didn't need 100 people and their horses anymore. But we found a way around that in terms of industrialization. What's different here is we've been really focused on a mindset or a mental model before that came from Taylor. So Taylor's view of um, industrial revolution or perfection, and that came from pin factory, hundreds of years ago. Which is okay. How do we create this one task? How do we break this down so that we have 10 different parts? They all perfect their part, and together from those 10 parts, we create this beautiful pen. That is what happens as a result of that is a reductionist mentality. So we're looking to minimize cost in that process so that you don't need Declan who can do 10 things. You can use Karl who can just do one, and he's going to do it 100 times over. So it's this idea that you break things into parts, and it's a cost benefit by doing that. That can't be the way that we move forward, because if we do that, the greatest cost saving is people. So you will swap the people out and put the machines in. And that's not the answer. So to your question, what are we doing? We're spending a lot of time talking about abundant culture, abundant mentality, how we will be better together, and then how we're building symmetrical culture instead of a replacement or reductionist culture.
Mm. And I imagine symmetrical as well as that perspective of how do we make this so our go-to perspective, so our culture, so the way that we do things here is the sum is greater, or the outcome is greater than the sum of its parts, right? Rather
Yes.
than, to your point, we're looking at all these different individual parts making a perfect outcome. Well, hang on, why aren't we looking for ways that 1 + 1 = 3?
Yeah.
Mm.
Yes.
Mm.
But that's a challenge. You think about the boards and the shareholders who are maybe next generation above me, where they're used to it. They only know the Taylorist view. We have to challenge a mental model, that's why I said it's a little bit more challenging for me. That's a massive undertaking because they're looking, to your point, around short-term objectives. What's our reporting for the quarter? We got to start taking a longer-term view on this.
Mm. And these are, to your point, pretty dramatic philosophies and frameworks and paradigms that have and depending on how you define success, some would argue been relatively successful what they were meant to do for the last 100 years, 200
Yeah.
years of human society. So it is a big undertaking to challenge them and shift them collectively. If I were to ask you to tap into that, you said we have in common that little bit of an optimistic lens. If I was to ask you to tap into that optimistic viewpoint and share some of your hopes for the future that we're building, that we're not just yet to experience, we are actively co-creating and part of. I believe that everyone who listens to this show has an invested interest in playing their part in making better workplaces, better societies. What is your perspective on hope here when it comes to culture and workplaces and leadership in the conversation we've had today?
So I personally believe that we're hardwired for hope. It's part of the human condition. There's lots of, Eric Erickson has particular views on that. If you wanted to look into it, I'm sure you know these things. But I think hope, we do start with hope. But gee, we're complacent. Gee, we're lazy. And gee, we're conditioned. We tend to think, believe, because we're so hopeful, oh, it'll be okay. We'll be all right. And so we walk into these cliffs. Social media is a great example. We sort of said, oh, this is going to be great. We're going to connect. Declan and I don't live too close together. We're going to be able to share photos of our kids. It's going to be wonderful. Wait, all of a sudden, we've got hundreds of people being murdered in certain situations. We've got polarization and vilification of particular minority groups, all based on misinformation that's come through this particular channel that we were very hopeful about. So what am I hopeful for? I'm really hopeful that we see leaders with courage that aren't just interested in capitalism and money, that we see leaders who are themselves more contemplative and have a broader perspective, that haven't grown up and been conditioned by their environment to believe that their success is individual financial freedom. I'm hopeful that we have more a service-based mentality, more servant leadership, those people that are prepared to have a pro-social perspective and not shy away from that. I want to see that in politics. I definitely want to see it in the commercial realm, because if we don't, we will start seeing a lot of destabilization because of AI, just back on that point. And then we certainly won't see leaders trying to get the best out of their people for the sake of it being the right thing to do.
Honestly, I cannot express enough for someone who spends a lot of time talking about happiness and, doing a podcast and YouTube and all these different platforms and conferences and keynotes. It's not often that I get to just sit in a space where I just go, oh, I just want to take that in and absorb that. And where I find that I struggle to find the words to convey what I want to share. So I will just say that thank you for coming onto the show and just sharing your insight, your experience, your perspectives, because there've been parts of this conversation that I know have really enriched and strengthened some of my perspectives. There've been parts of the conversations that have challenged and shifted some of my perspectives. And I hope that happens to our listeners as well. I do hope our listeners tune in and go, hey, these parts, I really want to jump on and really resonate with. These parts I'm going to have to sit with and ruminate on and ponder on and reflect on, right? And to your point, contemplate on. I hope that continues to happen as a result of this. So for those who do listen and find that experience happening with them and they want to then continue that curiosity-led exploration of these concepts and this sort of future that we're building together for a better world and hopefully better workplaces, where can they continue interacting with you and your work to continue that conversation, that learning experience?
So we've got a range of things that people, leaders, organizations can jump into. Some of them, they'll all be on our website, so thecultureinstitute.com.au. There's things like a one-day mastery program for executive leaders, a program that you're involved in, which is the Executive Certificate in Cultural Leadership. Wonderful program, and your part in particular is excellent. All the way through to CultureCon and then full transformation work that we do. But Declan, I would say as well, it's great to be on the program. I really appreciate you extend the invitation. But there was something that my dad was a career psychologist and philosopher, and he passed away 4 years ago. And he said many things that were profound, but certainly he said something to me that changed my view. So I was a very high performance focused individual, sporting wise, career wise. And he used to sort of subtly say things in a way that he wasn't a very demanding, overbearing father. So he'd say little things. And something he said to me was, life's meant to be enjoyed. And I was like, well, it's such a small statement, but it reframed so much of what I was doing at the time and so much of the way that I consult to my high performance leaders or high performing teams at the moment is they miss that. So your work is so important in bringing that realization around happiness. So thank you for the work that you do.
And I appreciate that. I know from very early on when we started connecting with each other, I could tell there was a real deep mutual respect and gratitude for each other's work. And I'm proud to say that we're both doing good work out in the world and we get to continue that work together. So once again, Karl, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Declan. Pleasure.
I really meant what I said to Karl at the end of our conversation that we got to share. And that is, it's very rare that I get to sit in a space where I'm lost for words and just take in the lessons, the learnings, the insights that had been shared with me. This was one of those conversations. So once again, a huge thank you to Karl for joining us and generously sharing his wisdom, his stories, his insights, and his perspective on what it means to create cultures we can be proud of. I know I can conclude this conversation by saying there is a huge difference between having a culture and actually living a culture. And Karl really helped us see what that looks like in action. Now, if you'd like to find out more about Karl's work, I highly recommend that you visit cultureinstitute.com.au or you connect with him directly on LinkedIn. He does incredible work, him and his team. There are some great resources that you can tap into, and you can check out some of his thought pieces through the growth faculty as well as through the resources on his website. And hey, if this episode did resonate with you, as always, I would love for you to play your part in actively spreading a ripple effect of happiness and helping more people find out about the show. All it takes is 30 seconds of your time to follow, subscribe, rate and review the show, and share it with someone that you think will find it insightful, invigorating, and maybe spark a moment of curiosity in someone else. If you're looking to create a workplace culture you're proud of that elevates you, of course, reach out to Karl. You can reach out to myself. We often share with each other. We concluded this conversation off air by saying, hey, it's really nice to see great people doing great work, and we both feel like we're making the same goal, which is to create happier, healthier organizations. We're just coming at it from different angles. So we'd love to invite you to be part of that with myself and BU Happiness College or with Karl at the Culture Institute. But now, thank you for tuning in. And remember, we all have a role to play in making the world a little bit happier. I'll see you next time.